Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, we talk politics. Well, here in the UK, Sikh issues get talked about once again in Parliament as the community mobilises its increasingly powerful lobbying force. Meanwhile, in the US, it's all about Trump. At a joint press conference, the Indian media put Trump on the spot about Khalistan, and we then take a look at his rather interesting response. Meanwhile, global geopolitics are clearly entering a significant new era as the so-called golden age of Trump sweeps Europe potentially into irrelevance to leave room for the new genuine superpowers. Does that include India? And we wrap up our coverage of the Invictus Games at the end of the show, so do stay tuned for that. Well, all this and more on today's packed show, but joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our viewers. We hope you had an amazing weekend. Welcome back for another week full of all kinds of information, news, and events. But let's also take a moment to remember that you can find our link tree, which gives you the link to where our program is aired on different platforms, but also how you can help support the channel. We appreciate all of the support from our amazing viewers, and just ask that you keep those comments coming. They're always great to read.
Absolutely. And James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And indeed, of course, as usual, we will be taking a look at Leslie's great comments at the end of the show, which have been filling up below the video. So thank you, as always, for those. Right, James, let's get the show underway. What are you going to start us off with this morning?
The Invictus Games wrapped up last night, Angus, and it was a huge success. And of course, leading that was over 2,000 volunteers who gave their time to help set up, take down, greet people, just everything that you can imagine. The volunteers were instrumental in bringing it together. Now, with that, of course, there were over 20 countries participating, hundreds of athletes from around the world. And I must say, it has brought a real excitement to Vancouver, and of course Vancouver's no stranger to hosting big events such as the Olympics and even going back to the 80s with the World Fair. So it was just another notch in our belt to hosting amazing events here in Vancouver. The athletes and the awards were just off the charts, and the excitement that not only the athletes brought but also their families and supporters from around the world brought a huge benefit to the tourism spending in Vancouver and Whistler over this tough time when money's a little tighter for people around the world. So I just wanted to finish off our segments on the Invictus Games with a look at the actual closing ceremonies and the closing speeches. And it'll be a few minutes long here, but worth watching. I think that there's a lot to be said that not only honors all of the volunteers, all of the athletes and the coaches and the training staff, but it brings a lot of similarities into what I was speaking of last week, and that is the whole goal of empowerment, of making sure that everyone is created equal, to give everyone an equal platform. And that, again, shares a lot of similarities with the Sikh beliefs. And, of course, we saw a lot of Sikhs out there who were volunteering and giving of their time during the week as well. So it has, as I said, just been a beautiful event. It went without any major problems, and yeah, it was a wonderful games had. Of course, Angus, you know that the next games are going to be in your neck of the woods. In Birmingham is where the next games will be hosted. So let's take a look at the closing ceremonies, the entrance, and the speeches there.
Bonsoir tout le monde! Hello, Invictus! How you all doing tonight? Now, Vancouver and Whistler know a thing or two about hosting big sporting events, and they always find a way to go way above and beyond. How were these games? How was Invictus, gang?
Please welcome the CEO of Invictus Games 2025, Scott Moore.
Wow, what a night. I'm here to say two words that are so important at Invictus. Thank you. Thank you, Vancouver Whistler, for an amazing 9 days. To our army of yellow jackets, 2,000 strong. I tried to meet as many of you as I could to thank you personally. We couldn't have done it without you, and we thank you for making these games for us.
Le drapeau est maintenant remis au ministre canadien des anciens combattants. The flag is now passed to the Canadian Minister of Veterans Affairs, Darren Fisher. As these games come to a close, the Invictus Games flag will now be passed back to the Invictus Games Foundation. Accepting the flag, Chief Executive Dominic Reid, who will present the flag to the next host of the Games to be held in Birmingham, UK. Accepting the flag on behalf of the Invictus Games 2027, the Parliamentary Undersecretary of State for Veterans and People, Alistair Carnes. The founder of the Invictus Games, Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry.
Oh, Canada. You've only gone and done it again. Did we all have fun? Team Canada, you've made your country proud. Thank you for bringing your heart to the forefront of these games and for showing all of us how it's done. To the host nations, to the host First Nations, thank you for your partnership, your friendship over the past 3 years. What your people have endured should never have happened. You've shown us what it looks like to fight for the survival of something far greater. Something far greater. Your land, your culture, your communities, and your light. You show the world how to move forward, armed with the truth in order to achieve reconciliation. And for that, we are forever grateful. Chin Chin Swai. To our comrades, friends, or loved ones who we lost to battle or to suicide, tonight we honor you too. Being a hero, being a role model, it's not just about resilience, skill, or power. It's about integrity, compassion, and courage. You give us hope. You guys give us hope through your healing, through your honesty, and through your humanity, and of course, through your humor. Our entire Invictus community, whether here tonight or watching from home, is making the world a better place. And you're doing it by being your awesome selves. And here we are, more than a decade later, in a world still full of strife and trauma. And as much as we wish these games weren't necessary, I understand why they are still needed, perhaps more than ever. It's because of the strength you give to the world, the power of your example, your duty to one another. You may swear allegiance to different flags, but you stand united in your decency, your compassion, and your spirit of service. Now, I can't stand before you and promise that there won't be challenging times ahead. But I promise you, you're better equipped now than you were before. You've reclaimed what was lost, restored what was broken, achieved the impossible. Remember what makes you tick. Hold on to it, rely on it. Use it for yourself and those around you, for service to one another will save us. And while I never expected that we would be here in 2025, from one soldier to another, I also promise you this. So long as our brothers and sisters are striving to heal and grow, the Games will go on. So long as there are those around the world who view you with sympathy rather than admiration and respect, the Games will go on. And so long as the challenges around us demand it and require it, the Games will go on. Bring on Invictus Games Birmingham 2027. You guys have permission to party. Thank you.
So a few things, Angus, that I thought, first of all, whether you like Harry or not, I thought that this speech was very well done, very well stated. Some of the points that I think are important out of these games is that it was the first Invictus Games where they've actually created a legacy fund for the communities in which hosting the games is such an honor. And this year, I'm happy to say that they raised over $5 million that'll be put into that legacy fund to help with programs for veterans and those who have suffered injuries or illness as a result of their service. So that is a huge win as well for the Canadian soldiers and veterans that hosted the games this year. Also, I thought that with the speech itself, there was a lot of similarities there. And one of the things that stood out was the acknowledgement of the First Nations and the Indigenous people. And I think that that really ties close to something that we will see in the future when it comes to Khalistan and the Sikh community, because we know that the Hindutva, that the BJP and the RSS and, everybody that's rooting against the Khalistan movement are those who are going to be standing there one day with egg on their face and apologizing for trying to quash the cultural significance of the Sikh community, to try and take away the land of Punjab that'll become Khalistan, that was once such a powerful and mighty presence in the world through the Sikh Empire. And, it's just so many things that you have to look at, the cultural impact, the society, the land, all of that, but also that he acknowledged not only the people that went to war and came back injured, but also those who fought the mental health illnesses that are associated with battle as well. And that is the level of suicide. And he addressed that in remembering the victims of suicide, which also draws a big similarity in terms of the suffering of the Sikh people in Punjab. When you look at the farmers and the level of suicide there, it again is something that needs to be addressed. But I think that although this is focused on the Invictus Games and soldiers and military service members, I think that the speech, that the issues are such a broad covering range, and a lot of the principles and the values that are being pushed through that speech and the event itself really align with what we're going to see that will make Khalistan such an amazing presence in the world, such a great country, and such a great place that people are going to want to go. And maybe, Angus, they will host the Invictus Games someday in Khalistan.
Yes, it was an interesting report, and yeah, of course, I mean, there are so many, I suppose, links to the Sikh community and the Sikh philosophy. Of course, the military links and the military prowess and the pride and physical well-being, physical capabilities, the camaraderie, etc. And as you say, those links to what effectively will establish the solid foundations of Khalistan. It's been, I would say, yeah, clearly a very successful games. Delightful to see it. Well done to all the athletes. Again, it's just the camaraderie is second to none. You only find it, I have to say, in some sort of military context. It's an almost unique camaraderie. So it's fantastic to see that manifest itself in those games. Prince Harry, I was actually delighted. This is a horrible thing to say, but I was delighted to see that Meghan actually went home early, and it wasn't all about Meghan. Actually, Harry finally managed to step up into the spotlight, and yeah, he made a great speech. I have to say, well done to Harry. And there's a slight tinge of sadness, almost just from a completely irrelevant point on this, but about Harry. But what could have been? You know, he actually does have a lot of potential to do good in this world, and unfortunately seems to have gone down a strange path with his wife. And when he actually gets the opportunity, and I have to say, on his own to get into the spotlight and do good, he does a magnificent job. He takes after his mother. So I think he really he did himself proud, both in that speech and I think just in the games as a whole on his own. So well done to Prince Harry. Yes, of course, coming back to Birmingham next time, and not Birmingham, but Birmingham, as we pronounce it over here in the UK. And yeah, I'm sure, and the Midlands say, you say tomato, we say tomato. And the Midlands, of course, is actually is a good stronghold of the Sikh community here in the UK. So I've no doubt the Sikh community will be in attendance watching a lot of those events once they cross the Atlantic over here. So. But all in all, yes, I'd say a very successful games. Great to see. Well done to all the soldiers of every nationality, every background. Fabulous contributions, fabulous efforts. Nod to local culture, as you say, James. I think that this whole indigenous culture is really a big movement. And of course, that does have links to the Khalistan argument saying, well, you've got to respect local cultures. The world is moving to modern society, 21st century society is moving towards recognising and accepting and encouraging local indigenous culture, which is completely contrary to the politics of Modi and the BJP. So unfortunately, Modi, the world, the trend of the world's culture is moving against you. Unfortunately, it is actually recognising those local indigenous cultures, which includes, of course, the Sikh culture around what will be Khalistan. So, excellent report, James. Thanks very much indeed for that. Very interesting to see.
Yeah, and when they referred to the army of yellow jackets, the yellow jackets were bright and vibrant, and those were the volunteers that he was referring to, and they had the bright yellow jackets so that anybody that saw them and that made sure they stood out, that they knew they were the volunteers there to help them. So that was great that they acknowledged that. And as you touched on, yeah, that actually, BC Place Stadium where that event took place, Princess Diana has actually been in that building for the during the World Fair Expo 86, and I have no doubt that as she looks down on her son, she's definitely proud of what he's accomplished in these games, if nothing else. So absolutely a huge event. But moving on, we're going to actually jump over into a different area, and that, of course, is the shifting balance of power when it comes to the U.S. wanting to pull back, and I won't say withdraw from NATO, because they are still committed at a certain level, but they are pulling back some out of Europe and want to refocus on the Indo-Pacific, and that is, of course, a big deal. And with that, Pete Hegseth, of course, and J.D. Vance were at different events throughout the last week, and that had to do with the Security Council meetings as well as the NATO meetings. So there was a lot going on there and a lot of different information. But we're going to focus more on the commitment to NATO and where things are shifting. And I do think that even though the U.S. is talking about pulling back some out of Europe, I think that NATO and the U.S. are actually a lot more aligned in and what they see as the big threats being India, China, Russia, to that extent when it comes to international security and trying to move forward and watch where the threats are coming from and to put these threats on notice. So here is Pete Hegseth at the conference here as he arrived, post meetings and then pre-meetings as well. So.
Good morning. It is a real pleasure to welcome Pete Hegseth again today to NATO. We had a wonderful dinner last night. We discussed a lot of things. Obviously, defense spending. Clearly, we have to do more. We have to ramp up defense spending because we know we cannot protect ourselves 4 or 5 years from now if we don't. And also, we need to ramp up defense spending because it is clear that the US rightly requires us to do more here on the European side and the Canadian side of NATO. It's only fair, it's only sensible. We also will discuss defense industrial production because we simply do not produce enough. This is including the US and up to and including Turkey and everything in between. We need to really get more output from our huge defense industrial base to keep up with Russia, the Chinese and others. And then during the lunch we will of course discuss Ukraine. What happened yesterday, of course, here in the meeting and also coming out of the White House will lead to debate. But there is a clear convergence emerging, and I'm very happy about that. And the convergence is, 1, we need peace in Ukraine. 2, we have to make sure that Ukraine is in a position of strength. And 3, as you, Pete, said yesterday, we can never, ever, ever again have a Minsk III situation where a peace is not durable. So collectively, we'll work on that. We will discuss this amongst the allies. I look forward to that. Pete, again, welcome to NATO. Welcome on board.
Well, Mr. Secretary General, thank you very
so
much.
much.
Appreciate it. And we did, my wife and I were happy to join you last night for dinner. We appreciate your hospitality and your leadership of this alliance, which is more relevant and more robust than ever. And that is certainly the U.S. commitment on behalf of President Trump, the recognition that the world is a safer place, a freer place when NATO is strong. And we certainly feel that way, and our investment reflects that. We echo your sentiments on defense spending. The president has said 2% is not enough, and we're going to argue that up to 5% is the necessary investment from NATO countries to ensure we're able to meet the threats of the future, whether that's Russia on the continent or an ascendant China who has their own ambitions as well. But also the defense industrial base, not just in Europe, but in the United States as well. We need the ability to create the systems and the munitions necessary to sustain a fight. One other thing I would add is foreign military sales, and that's something the United States is committed to expediting the process of ensuring that our allies get what they need when they need it. That is critically important. And then as you saw yesterday, there's one man in the world capable of convening the parties together to bring peace, and that's President Donald Trump, which he demonstrated yesterday in speaking to both Vladimir Putin and Zelensky, and bringing about, we believe, a durable, lasting peace on the continent, which his goal is to stop the killing and bring that peace, that it's in the interest of the continent and the United States to do so. We look forward to even more robust conversations today, realistic, honest, straightforward discussions, but all under the guise of full support and belief that a strong NATO alliance is what will defend the free world alongside ensuring America maintains that leadership role. So, Mr. Secretary General, thank you.
Mr. Secretary, thank you so much.
You got it. Thank you.
Okay. See you guys later.
So as we can see there, it is definitely on top of mind that they want to stay attached with NATO and to continue the growth and expansion of their presence, but outside of the European continent as well. And when you look at that, the U.S. wants to see all countries get up to a 5% spend on military. And what a lot of people don't realize is that they are not just taking all of this money and giving it to NATO. What it actually entails is that all of that spending is in terms of what each nation spends on their own military defense, on their domestic defense, as well as internationally. So it's not just giving all of this money to NATO, as some would have you believe. And when you look at the sheer volume, of course, the U.S. is going to want to see an increase in levels in spending because the majority of NATO countries actually get their supplies and their munitions and technology from U.S.-based contractors and service providers. And even with the top 4 U.S. military contractors receive over 20% of the U.S. spending budget of almost $1 trillion a year. And so that's with them. So when you look at moving to that regard, the military sales, whether it's being a member in NATO or increasing the presence with India, that is a huge benefit to the U.S. economy. Now, another thing that many people may not realize is that the U.S. and India are very tied together when it comes to some of those defense contracts. The Adani Group as well is very much involved in U.S. military supplies. And the Adani Group is in partnership. They have several partnerships in the U.S. that are supposed to be separate from control and any access by the India government, but it's very interesting to see that they have that presence. Now, they've also signed contracts and partnerships with the Adani Group in terms of Israeli protection and supplying military defense systems. The Hermes 900 drones, where the Adani Aero Defense has signed with Elbit Systems, and they've partnered up with that system. Adani has also reached an agreement providing 44% stake to Elbit in Athava Advanced Systems, and they are actually, that Adani Group U.S. subsidiary actually has their fingers in supplying technology, weapons, and other items to the National Defense Department, to Homeland Security. They are dealing with sustainment and supplies. They're dealing with commercial aviation, medical instrumentation, public communications, and they have been provided a special security agreement by the U.S. government for the Adani Group to be involved in that corporation, the supply of military infrastructure to the U.S. So it's very interesting to see how much they are already, because the fact that a big point on the recent meetings between Trump and Prime Minister Modi focused on military spending and the U.S. supplying more to India. So again, the U.S. is counting on that to increase their GDP and their output. So as I stated, that the U.S. has not withdrawn from NATO. They remain a member and they're still bound by the Article 5 agreement, which means that if there is an attack on any NATO nation, the U.S. is obligated to go in. When they are sharing the burden, of course, they touched on several countries, including Canada, that have not yet met their 2% targets. We know that certain individuals, especially the Liberal Party, has focused on trying to get to those targets, originally placed for 2035. Now they've expedited. They want to hit the 2% and surpass it by 2030, and they want to do it sooner, but realistically they're pushing for 2030 to make that happen. So again, the priorities are shifting to the Indo-Pacific, and of course we know that there are a lot of threats there, but also it's interesting that India is one of those major threats. They've jumped up on the threat list, up in the top 3 for foreign interference, for transnational repression, and different things. So it's interesting to see how they want to supply more military and technology and work in those partnerships at the same time as ignoring certain other things, including human rights abuses. So again, of course, the U.S. is pushing Europe to be more independent, more autonomous when it comes to their defense systems, and that may not be such a bad thing. I mean, you know, every child has to grow up at some point, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm just saying that sometimes you have to look at being self-sustaining more so in this crazy world of unpredictability. So I think that that pushes the UK and the European Union to just have that bit more of supply and push for more manufacturing and contracts on their own soil, which of course could be very good for the European Union in terms of their budgets, in terms of their GDP increase. So again, we've talked about the different security concerns, such as that in the South China Sea, North Korea's nuclear program, cross-strait relations between China and Taiwan, and the active U.S. engagement. So again, it is a lot to go through, a lot to look at. And I'm going to not go through all of this, but again, I just wanted to point out some of the benefits both between the U.S., between them and India, the increased concerns on the Indo-Pacific, but also where there is the overlap in terms of increased spending by NATO means increased revenue for the U.S., and that would make sense why they want to push for the 5% level of spending for each nation. And I don't know that 5% is a realistic target over the next decade, but again, we'll have to watch and see how that works. As I said, just in terms of U.S. defense contracts, not including those of NATO and other nations, the top companies are listed there in this little graph, with Lockheed Martin, of course, being number one. But you also have to keep in mind that there are other suppliers that may not be included in the list due to reporting and other subsidiaries, just the way that it all works out. But you can see the top companies there who are dealing with it. And one of them is Booz Allen Hamilton, down at $6.83 billion, but they have actually jumped. You can see here from 2017 at $4 billion per year supply. So they've gone up over 50% increase in that period until 2024. You can look at some of the best performing aerospace defense stocks. Again, it's RTX, and they've jumped from, February 2024. They've skyrocketed over 40%. And of course, this again impacts a lot of people who have sway in the White House and on international policy. And finally, we'll look at the solutions. And it's a cent there for Kratos Defense and Security Solutions. And you can see again, they have jumped up from $18 billion to over $28 billion in sales. So again, military and war is a huge business for the U.S. And that is why I think that we're seeing a lot of, we'll say, hand-holding when it comes to human rights and holding countries to account for their abuses and their atrocities and their crimes, when the U.S. wants to also at the same time bring all of that money into the U.S. But it shows the kind of dollars that we're talking about, and why I think that we've missed the mark in the opportunity to hold Narendra Modi accountable for his actions and to force him into a better position of human rights respect and respecting his own democracy and democratic process, Angus.
Yes, it's. I think Trump, as I often say, certainly hit the ground running, and so much has been achieved in the last few weeks in terms of changing the agenda, totally 180-degree reversal in so many areas. And of course, global geopolitics are massively being impacted literally over the last weeks by his new policies and his new direction. Of course, his thrust into Ukraine, this basically dragging Putin to the negotiating table. And I would say this is probably a very willing Putin to the negotiating table. He's really snubbed Europe, he's snubbed Zelensky, and he's basically said, look, no, the grown-ups are in the room now. It's time we stop this, stop the killing. And this has really, really upset the European Union. And I chuckle because this basically confirms a lot of what many people in Britain have realised, is the EU is just an enormous, expensive, undemocratic talking shop. It achieves very little other than just stagnating its own economy. And in terms of global geopolitics, it's becoming increasing irrelevance. It's an anchor, I have to say. It's a commercial anchor holding back so many things. And Trump, as I say, he's often... he is the deal maker. He gets things done, and he's just waded in and said, "Right, that's it. Let's move things forward. Let's stop this war in Ukraine." And he's doing that. And of course, now we've got the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer flying to Munich for an emergency summit with all the other European leaders, saying, "Well, hang on a second. We want to be involved in this." Well, sorry, guys. You've been sitting there for 3 years twiddling your thumbs. And nothing's happened. The war's carried on, and you've achieved absolutely nothing. And this sums up the European Union. And so I have to say well done to Trump, and Hegseth is really moving things forward. It's a dynamic, forward-thinking, innovative administration in the US, and it is getting things done. It's producing results. A lot of people around the world might not like the way that he's going about it. Tough. All that matters is what happens at the end, is what he achieves. And he's going to achieve peace in Ukraine. There's no doubt about it. And it's really put the noses out of joint in the European Union. So I'm delighted about that. Now, when we talk about India, and I'll come on to my story in a moment when I'll talk about the results of his discussions with Modi about various things. But it's interesting, James, when you talk about the military aid. Yeah, I mean, gosh, India has benefited massively from the US, and the US's willingness to feed the India military machine. Essentially, what's in it for the US? Of course, there's an awful lot of dollars in it for the US, and Trump's not stupid. He is a businessman at heart, and he knows that every deal he signs with India, militarily speaking, is another dollar into US pockets. So, of course, he's more than willing, from a commercial basis, to sell military assets and capabilities to India. But, of course, there's a bigger picture benefit to this. India traditionally has had this historic alliance with Russia. Russia has been one of the biggest suppliers of military assets to India effectively since partition. We often talk about the deep ties with Moscow, between Delhi and Moscow. And nothing really has changed there. But actually what has changed there, of course, is since the Ukraine war and global sanctions, Russia has become decreasingly able to supply India with military aid, with military capabilities, with supplies, assets, whatever. And traditionally, it did in the past supply jets, Sukhoi jets, as an example. But of course now, after the Ukraine war, it can't afford to. It just doesn't have the capability to supply India anymore. But India wants these things. It wants to stay ahead of the curve, militarily speaking. So into that vacuum, in steps Donald Trump saying, thank you very much. We want to seduce you away from Russia. We need you more on side with us because, of course, the great game with China. They want India on side against China. So Donald Trump is more than happy to sell F-35s to India, which is still very much on the cards. Instead of India buying Russian jets, they're going to end up buying US jets, probably in the form of F-35s. Now, the US actually has supplied, I believe, something like, I think it's $20 billion worth of military assets to India since 2008. India is expected to spend, get this, $200 billion over the next decade on its forces. This is a country that actually has some of the greatest poverty on the planet. So I do raise a slight eyebrow here. $200 billion pays for an awful lot of hospitals, gets an awful lot of people out of poverty. But, well, that's the BJP's priorities. I have to say, there is an understanding here that, of course, it is a future superpower. It has China on its doorstep. It does actually need to stay in step with China's military growth as well. So there is an argument to say actually India does need to build its armed forces, essentially to protect itself from China. We're looking potentially 10, 20, 30 years ahead. So there is that argument. But yes, there is also the argument, well, what about its poverty that it lives in? So, James, I think, the global geopolitics here are taking a very interesting turn now. Trump is really tying up deals with India. He knows India, firstly, is a massive market for US goods, but also from a geopolitical perspective, it is increasingly recognised that India really needs to come on side. We'll talk about human rights when I talk about my stories to some degree. But yes, I think, well, I said in the introduction, a golden age of Trump politics. Others may disagree, and I'm sure you might, James, but it is certainly what we cannot deny is certainly things are changing.
Absolutely, Angus, and you know me. I definitely disagree with a lot of what Trump does, but at the same time, I've got to give the U.S. government and Trump credit when it comes to looking outside of their traditional markets, and that by saying, or what I mean is in terms of the NATO spending, but now branching out to look at India and other potential markets for not only military, but other expenses as well. And I think that this is why we haven't seen as much rhetoric about tariffs on India. And that's because a lot of it will have to do with military spending as well. But just in closing, Angus, we talked about the Munich Security Conference, and I just wanted to address something that happened the night before, and that is for all of those in the area in Germany, that our thoughts and our prayers are with all of those who were victims of the Afghan refugee who plowed his vehicle into the crowd of protesters and demonstrators. 32 people were injured, so we just wanted to give mention and our thoughts out to the families and victims of that event.
Indeed we do, and that is actually quite an interesting link, because of course that incident, as have many incidents occurred in Germany, talking about politics, root cause was down to immigration, uncontrolled immigration, and uncontrolled immigration has become a massive issue across so many areas now, and of course the United States particularly has suffered uncontrolled immigration, which is one of the main reasons that Trump swept to power. And of course, one of his main targets is repatriating many of those illegal immigrants. And of course, with his recent meeting with Narendra Modi, who was there for a couple of days last week, that did form one part of a lot of the in-depth negotiations. But what did Narendra Modi achieve during his brief visit to the United States? Well, it would appear on the whole not a lot. I mean, yes, we talk militarily. I think there will be a lot of business deals agreed between Modi and Trump over the coming years, and certainly not least from the military side. But of course, the global press has picked apart the press conference and the announcements post Modi's visit to try and work out, okay, what actually was achieved during that visit. Well, I'll take one news outlet at random. I think it's an Australian news outlet, and they sum it up quite nicely. They said, in short, Modi left Washington without a tariff exemption as Trump reinforced reciprocal duties, while both pledged to strengthen trade, energy, and defense ties. The meeting also saw discussions in the US extraditing an accused terrorist, deportations, that immigration we talked about, and an awkward Trump moment with an Indian reporter. So let me just quickly just rush through to summarise really what was discussed. Now, Modi did, of course, go to Washington with one primary goal, and that was to try and exempt India from his massive tariff war. Now, from a purely numbers perspective, India really was a big target here. Trade between the two countries has been a massive thorn in the US's side. Trump's recognised this, and we knew that he was going to do something about this. And he did actually label, during his last presidency, he labelled India as the tariff king, because India actually charges up to 100% tariffs on some US products. Of course, it's not surprising that Trump was going to target India on his second term. And we talked about the trade deficit on several occasions between India and the United States. And so, of course, unsurprisingly, Modi went home empty-handed in terms of tariffs, and it does look very strongly like those tariffs are going to be imposed on Indian goods coming into the United States. So, unfortunately, Mr. Modi left empty-handed in that department. And in fact, to quote Mr. Trump, and he said, I can't do it. I'd love to be able to do a Trump accent because it's such a wonderful accent. But he basically said it's very hard to sell into India because they have trade barriers, very strong tariffs. Prime Minister Modi recently announced a reduction to India's unfair, very strong tariffs that limit us access to the Indian market very strongly. And really, it's a big problem, I must say. So basically, he said, this is at the press conference, there was no ambiguity there. He said, look, India, tariffs, big problem, we're going to act on this. So unfortunately for India, those tariffs are coming in. Immigration, absolutely huge topic. They clearly talked about it at great length. They did say that well, Narendra Modi is actually more came from Narendra Modi recognising, in fact, he was very proactive on this. He said, look, I do, and Modi said, I do deeply appreciate, and I learned from President Trump, is that he keeps the national interest supreme, as I do, and he talked about how he always looks at India's interests first. But Mr. Trump sees one threat of his country's national interest is coming directly from India, and India is the largest source of illegal immigrants into the US after Latin America, so it's massive, really. One thing that did come up was that the US has very recently agreed to extradite to India a Pakistani national who was allegedly responsible for the terrible terrorist attacks on a hotel in Mumbai back in 2008. And so, again, this was actually a very positive move by Mr. Trump, and this was met very positively, of course, by the right wing in India. Certainly the Godi media lapped this up, saying, look at this is a real example of how strong the ties are between the BJP, Narendra Modi and Donald Trump. Well, it's not all sweetness and light, I have to say. At the end of the day, Mr. Trump, all Trump cares about is agreeing deals, is getting deals done. He wants India alongside geopolitically from a military perspective and an ally, but he also wants India alongside as a commercial partner. So that was all the positive side, but the tariffs are coming in. Trump's waded in with a blunt instrument. He's wading these tariffs around like a blunt hammer, and he's hammering India with it. He's just going to hammer India until India eventually relents with its own tariffs. The grown-ups will enter the room and they'll say, you know what, let's just stop all this nonsense. Let's just get some deals done like proper commercial partners. So again, it's all about results, and that will be the result out of this. Trump is going to get a positive result out of this. Now, I do want to show a couple of videos actually, and it's no surprising that the Godi media wanted to ask Trump. This was their big opportunity. Whilst Modi was standing alongside Trump, this was their big opportunity to ask Trump about Khalistan, about, in the United States, this large Khalistani or this large Sikh diaspora who have been a real thorn in the side of Narendra Modi. We do know this, that Modi and the Godi media have been targeting, and in fact targeting, transnational oppression, literally targeting with weaponry, the Khalistan movement. So of course the Godi media have put Trump on the spot and said, Mr. Trump, what do you think about the Khalistanis? Well, there's a couple of questions that were asked here. I'm going to play the first question, which was actually quite interesting. Just have a watch of this.
We'll do a few questions, please. Please, go ahead. Please, go ahead. Yeah, blue shirt.
Thank you, Mr. President. People in India will naturally welcome your decision to extradite Thakur Rana to India back home. In that context, I would like to ask you a question about, in the last few years, we have seen several groups in the US raising anti-India voice, calling about separation, terrorism activities in India. Do you think that should continue here in the US as well?
You're going to have to go louder.
Mr. President, people in India would be welcoming your decision to extradite Thakur Rana to...
I can't understand a word he's saying.
May I, sir? May I? May I, sir?
Go ahead, back there.
Mr. President, thank you.
Okay, I think in reality, I don't think that you can read too much into that, but basically the Indian reporter had a very strong accent. And now, I think most of us understood what he said, but Trump clearly couldn't. But there is an element of people saying maybe he deliberately didn't hear that question. The question essentially was, look, you've got a strong anti-India element, in other words, the Khalistan movement in the US. What are you doing about it? And he pretended not to, or pretended, he said he didn't understand the question. So again, a very simple sideswipe to avoid the question. But another reporter from the Godi media did stand up and ask actually the same question. So take a listen to this.
The question is about the fact that you've decided to extradite Thakur Rana. Thank you so much. India has been waiting to have him back in India to bring him to justice. But there are many other elements in the United States of America, particularly Khalistani separatists who've been working against Indian interests. How is the United States of America going to cooperate on that front with India? There have been allegations that have been leveled against Indian agencies by the Biden administration. Are you going to relook that with Tulsi Gabbard as DNI now?
Well, I don't think India had a very good relationship with the Biden administration. They wouldn't sell them oil and gas, which is rather hard to believe because, it's a good thing to do. And a lot of things happened that weren't very appropriate, I thought, between India and the administration, the Biden administration. But as you said, we're giving a very violent man, it seems to me. I mean, I don't know that he's been convicted yet or will be, but let's assume he's a pretty violent person. We're giving him back to India immediately. And there are more to follow because we have quite a few requests. So we work with India on crime, and we want to make it good for India, and it's very important. So that kind of a relationship is very important to us. Okay?
Now that was interesting because he basically ignored really the key part of that question. Now, was that deliberate? Essentially, this is a classic Donald Trump response. Firstly, flattering India, saying, you know, we're delighted to be working with India. You know, the Biden administration didn't have a good relationship, but I want to have a good relationship. And you could see that beaming smile on Narendra Modi's face. So again, this is Trump, classic Trump. He knows how to really immolate his opponents over the negotiating table. He knows how to really butter them up, make them feel good about themselves, and that's what Narendra Modi walked away. But he ignored the key question. He talked about extraditing the Pakistan national for the Mumbai attacks, but he never mentioned the Sikh diaspora. He never mentioned Khalistan. I think that was a very deliberate. Don't want to talk about that. What does that mean? Well, you take your pick, James. It'll be interesting, really, over the coming years, because we will find out over the coming years what his true feelings are about Khalistan, because the movement is really gathering a pace now. But certainly, in the spotlight in front of the Indian media, he absolutely did just totally ignored the question, not interested in talking about it. I'm not giving you what you're looking for. I'm giving you nothing on it whatsoever. My interpretation is I'm keeping that in my back pocket for when I sit down with India to talk about negotiations. That, to me, is the leverage. This is the leverage that he's got, James, and I think this. I think his response was a very, very deliberate not mentioning it.
Absolutely. With the first question there, with the mic issues and the accent, the second that he pushes past, the other female reporter actually was going to, I think, bring up his question to speak it more clearly. Didn't allow it, moved on to somebody in the back of the room. So that's just the way it is. They have interpreters and that they could have figured out the question very easily, very quickly, but chose to brush it aside. That was, in terms of the context, it seemed to be more pro-Khalistan in terms of the reporter's question. And the second question that we saw the clip of seemed to be more pro-India to a point in terms of the response, and really pushed aside. We know that the Khalistan referendum takes place in Los Angeles for the next stop, which happens next month. And I have concerns about what's going to happen there in terms of any interference in that event to try and reduce the numbers. But I know that the Khalistan referendum is strong, and so are the people. So we'll watch and see how that plays out, Angus.
Indeed. So, yeah, we'll keep an eye on that. But I think the summary really of Modi's visit was, I think a lot was achieved, mainly from a commercial perspective. I think the whole Khalistan question, I think, was conveniently put to one side. I suspect it probably wasn't raised to a large degree within the discussions. I think there were, certainly for Modi and, well, certainly for Trump, the more important things were to discuss. That was the military agreements and the commercial agreements. I think Khalistan will enter the equation as one of these, as I keep saying, one of these finer points. This will be the leverage that Trump will use, the whole human rights issue. That, I think, will come into play when they get down to the finer points of the negotiation. I think this will be an interesting one to watch. So, in the interest of time, James, which is beating us already, let's move on to my second story. I'm going to stay with politics, but this time over the Atlantic, here in the UK. And really, the UK community has been hugely active. Certainly in the last couple of years, the campaigning has really grown apace. The lobbying amongst our MPs, we of course now have up to a dozen Sikh MPs in Parliament. I have to say, not all of them have really been pulling the weight as much as they should be for the community. One could maybe give them the benefit of the doubt to say maybe it's because they're new and they're still learning the ropes. That's certainly the benefit of the doubt that I will give them. But anyway, but certainly at a grassroots level, the community has been massively active, has been massively positive, taking huge steps forwards in raising Sikh issues into British politics, getting into Parliament, getting in front of the Prime Minister. Now, this week in Parliament, once again, and we've talked about recently how several times in recent weeks, various MPs have stood up in Parliament and talked about so many of these Sikh issues, particularly Jagtar Singh Johal, etc. But recently, in fact, last week, it was a Labour MP Verinder Jus. He stood up in Parliament, made a speech. He raised concerns of India's transnational oppression. And of course, he referred to Avtar Singh Kandar, the murder, or the potential murder of Avtar Singh Kandar a couple of years ago. And he did ask the UK government, Starmer's government, to address Sikh safety during meetings with Indian government representatives. Now, the Wolverhampton West MP also referenced India's assassination by Hardeep Singh Nijjar to highlight the global anti-Sikh terror campaign being run by India. Trials in the US and Canada against the Indian state-directed perpetrators of the transnational terrorism continue. In other words, once again, all these issues are being raised in the British Parliament. This is a massive step forward, because no more are these just little issues being talked about by a small minority at a very low level. They're actually being raised in the British Parliament. And the Sikh Federation of the UK have been, again, taking the vanguard in this lobbying. And they have really helped coordinate a massive grassroots movement in terms of writing letters to the MPs. And we often say to our audience, particularly here in the UK, but certainly in the US, write to your local political representatives. It really does have an impact. And the Sikh Federation UK have said that here in the UK, MPs up and down the country have received thousands of letters from Sikh constituents about India's bad behaviour. Different MPs have now started to respond. We talked about Warinder Jus. He's the MP for Wolverhampton West. And he's written to his constituents pointing to the fact that he has raised this matter in the Parliament. And I'll show you the video in a moment. The response received by Alex Ballinger, he's MP for Hales Owen, again for the Labour Party, the ruling party. He wrote a fabulous letter to the Guru Nanak Gurdwara in Smethwick, here in the UK. Weirdly, their own MP, their own constituency MP, didn't actually respond on most of the issues. Of course, the issues that we talk about on a regular basis, that the four key issues, or certainly three key issues that are being raised at the moment are, firstly, transnational repression, secondly, Jagtar Singh Johal, and thirdly is this judge-led inquiry about the events of 1984 and the UK's involvement in that. Those are certainly three, and Avtar Singh Kandar making the fourth. These are the main issues that are being pushed by the community. Now, let me first of all, I want to just play you. This is Warinder Jus in the British Parliament making his speech. Let me just play you this.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have a large. Excuse me, Madam Deputy Speaker. Clear my throat. I have a large Sikh population in my constituency of Wolverhampton West, and I've received many letters from constituents expressing concern about transnational repression and political interference by the Indian government, creating risks of safety and security for Sikhs not only travelling to India, but when they are in this country as well. And they referred to the mysterious sudden death of Avtar Singh Kandar in Birmingham in June 2023, days before the assassination of the Sikh leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Canada. Will the Leader of the House please ensure that our UK government ministers make representations to their counterparts in India to respect and comply with the rule of law and UK's sovereignty for the safety and security of Sikhs in this country?
Well, I know that what he raises will be really welcomed by the Sikh community across the UK. Very important issues around transnational aggression, and I will certainly make sure that the Minister has heard what he's said today and that the House is updated in due course.
Blah, blah, blah again. Again, it's just a typical, once again, another pointless anodyne response from the government. But the important point here is, once again, all these issues have been raised very vocally, totally publicly in Parliament. So again, it's this drip, drip, almost a torture for the British government. It's going to get to a point where they just cannot ignore these calls now coming from not just people in the street, but this is coming from their own MPs, people in their own party. The MPs are now, one after another, standing up, raising these issues once again. So this is how this lobbying from grassroots upwards, channeling these issues up to local MPs. So every time you write a letter to MP, the more letters that are received by these MPs, they feel more and more obliged to raise it in Parliament and internally within the government, behind the scenes. So Starmer is finding it increasingly harder to ignore these issues. So this is why this lobbying is really working. Now, this letter from Alex Ballinger MP, he as a result, again, he received a lot of letters from constituents around the country, but he also wrote a really positive letter again. This went to the Guru Nanak Gurdwara in Smethwick. And the letter, again, just to highlight some of the points here, but he said hatred towards Sikhs is completely abhorrent and has no place in our society. He referenced Hardeep Singh Jar, excuse me, and transnational oppression. He understands that the UK government has raised this matter with the government of India, and I encourage it to cooperate fully with the investigation, etc., etc. He does refer to the West Midlands Police and how they've had to issue these threat to life warnings to some members of the British Sikh community, and which again implies this transnational oppression that is going on and remains a present danger to many in the community here in the UK. And he says, I proudly celebrate the contributions of our diverse religious communities, and I am committed to enhancing equality and challenging oppression wherever we find it, etc., etc. So again, a very positive message. I would say in this letter, though, it actually lacks positive action. There is no message in this letter that says, I will do something about this. I will talk to Keir Starmer, my boss, about this. It's just there's a lot of platitudes and a lot of I recognise it. Well done to the Sikh community. You've done great work. Great, all very nice and everything, but where is the call to action here? Where is his action? I am going to do this. I will do that. I have to say it's a little bit lacking in that. It's a little bit of a political letter that says a lot, but actually in reality says not a lot. So, well, take from that what you will. But the good news is, though, and well done to the Sikh community here in the UK, well done to the Sikh Federation, that, again, taking the vanguard in this movement. But once again, this is proving, James, that grassroots lobbying, and once it's coordinated into a really powerful force spearheaded by an organisation that takes this battle to the right people, it is hitting where it hurts. It is hitting the Starmer government. Keir Starmer, I think, is going to find it harder and harder now to ignore this lobbying. This lobbying is much more intelligent now. It is much more effective. And the result of this is we're seeing on an almost regular basis now MPs standing up and talking about these key issues that are affecting the Sikh community, James.
Absolutely. And one of the lines there that stands out to me is where it says, I proudly celebrate the contributions of our diverse religious communities, and I'm committed to enhancing equality and challenging oppression wherever I find it. Well, apparently he's not looking in the right places, like right in front of him. There's a lot of oppression going on, including that of Jay, that needs to be addressed. And there are failing in that. We've seen time and time again where they bring it up, but there really is no plan that they've brought forward to the public to say, this is what we need to do, this is what India needs to do, and this is how we're going to achieve it. And that's where they're lacking, I believe.
Indeed, and we're often very critical of politicians right across the board, and I remain critical because they only act when they absolutely have no choice to act, and it's up to us then to give them no choice, that they have to act. And particularly, it's great that Avtar Singh Kandar has not been forgotten, and we certainly will not let Avtar Singh Kandar be forgotten. We will keep raising these issues, and we will keep highlighting this wherever we get the opportunity to make sure that these MPs and the government particularly can't get away with ignoring it, and they are going to have to take some action on this. So let's move on, James, into our comments section. Once again, well over time as always. Now, these comments, I wanted to raise these comments. It's actually, it doesn't raise an awful lot of points, but it's just a classic. This is a classic highlight, James, of how the internet generates arguments where in fact there is no argument whatsoever. And it started with, it's a couple of our regulars actually, and Hat B makes the point. We talked about how property and land has been confiscated off many Khalistan campaigners. And Hat B says they've taken properties and land of Hardeep Singh Nijjar and many other Sikhs abroad too who support Khalistan. And Achar Singh Gill says, no, not possible. Give some examples of this. And Satbach Singh wades in with a comment, and Achar Singh Gill says, no, you misunderstood me. I'm on your side. I deplore these actions. And then at the end of your comment says, look, try to understand what a person is saying before starting a stupid, unnecessary argument. And Hat B responds, I didn't start an argument. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. And I just wanted to highlight this, Jess. This is a wonderful, and if anybody has time, go have a look at this, because I laughed my way through this. This is a classic example of two people being on the same side of an argument, rubbing each other up the wrong way and ending up in an argument about absolutely nothing. But this is the internet in a nutshell, James. I did laugh when I read this.
The bright side is it gives us fun to look at in our comment section.
Absolutely, it's great for the algorithm because it's more comments. But thank you to all those who contributed in that argument about absolutely nothing at all. So it did make us laugh. Anyway, on to more serious matters. Achar Singh did actually talk about Sajjan Kumar's story, the story you covered, James. This was the former Congress MP who was found guilty of those dreadful crimes back in the 1984 genocide. And as you rightly say, the guilty verdict is too little too late. To call this justice is an insult, and it is indeed an absolute insult to the memory of all the killings of what you say is 19,000 human beings. And 5,000 in the capital city, New Delhi. Well, Vinnie Chorn, one of our resident agent provocateurs, I would call it, says 19,000, the numbers go up every time. But as Achar Singh comes back, say, look, only a stone-hearted Mutastani would make such an insensitive, stupid and cruel comment. Yeah, and actually, and this does highlight the point. I brought this comment up because it does highlight this very simple point. Nobody knows how many people were murdered during those dreadful few days. In 1984. The reason is because it was buried as much as possible, is because the government tried to hide and bury the facts. Nobody knows how many thousands. What we do know is that it numbered in the thousands, and the numbers do go up to a potential estimate of 20,000+ men, women and children were murdered during those first few days. The official estimates, I think, about 2,000 or 3,000. I mean, even 2,000 or 3,000 is an absolute outrage, but in reality, it probably did number in the tens of thousands. It's just that there were no official statistics because it was deliberately buried. And that's the point, Vinnie Chorn, when you rather frivolously say, oh, the numbers go up every time. Yeah, that's because it was deliberately buried. Nobody really knows how many thousands were killed. And actually, as you were rightly sort of slapped in the face about that, look, don't be so stone-hearted or even frivolous about this. It is not a joking matter, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And I mean, it was a genocide no matter how you look at it. And the Sikhs were murdered in the streets. And that is the reality. And when you use the term that they tried to hide and bury the facts, they did the same thing with the bodies, in that they tried to hide as many of the deaths as possible and the murders as possible to downplay the significance and the international outrage that was growing to what happened. And yeah, we can never forget that even 2,000 to 3,000 Sikhs being killed in the streets is way too many. But again, it is estimated to be much, much, much greater than that, Angus.
Yeah, and I would say to Vinnie Chorn, just seriously, go have a look at some of the photographs that do exist on the internet. Have a look at some of the photographs of some of the children that were murdered and burnt alive. If you really want to be frivolous and question the numbers, just go have a look at what actually happened during that time, and it will really sober you up and hopefully make you take this whole subject a little bit more seriously. Anyway, Jaslene then talks about those events, and actually Jaslene talks about it seemed a little bit too well organised, and we did refer, and I do refer our audience back to the coverage that I did a series of 4 programmes where we looked at it in detail, the events of 1984, all the events of 1984, from Blue Star through to the genocide. And we talked about how well organised it was, suspiciously well organised. And Jaslene says, look, that you actually believe it was originally for Operation Shanti. Now, for those who aren't aware, Operation Shanti was, and we don't have time to go into too much detail about it, but basically it was this alleged operation that Indira Gandhi had been actually planning, not Blue Star, this is worse than Blue Star. She was actually planning to completely obliterate the Sikh community in the Punjab with a massive military operation, essentially to carpet bomb the villages, the Sikh villages across the Punjab, particularly across the border with Pakistan. It was called Operation Shanti. It was under this false flag idea that Pakistan was invading, was in the process of invading the Punjab, and that this local Sikh community were rising up to fight with the Pakistanis against India. And so as a result of this, India was then going to send in the military, the air force, to carpet bomb all those villages and basically obliterate the Sikh community in one fell swoop under a false flag, under a false premise. That was Operation Shanti. Again, it actually formed part of a bigger picture, but we don't have time to talk about that. But so what you're saying, Jaslene, is that really, yeah, this was a lot of this was in place ready for Shanti, but in fact the genocide really was, in the absence of Shanti, it formed part of the plans for Shanti. So yeah, an interesting perspective on that one, James.
Absolutely. And again, it is, something that we may not know the full numbers for. And then Operation Shanty, it was averted. Thank goodness for that, because the bloodshed could have been so much greater, Angus.
Absolutely, it could. And Achal Singh Gill comes in again with a comment saying the 1984 Sikh pogroms were directed from the topmost office in India. Yeah, and again, it's all about this implication that the Indian government were somehow involved in this, not just involved in it, they helped coordinate it. Well, the ruling Congress Party at the time, we do know that the Congress Party were heavily involved. Not all of them, but many MPs were involved in this operation. And Azad, as you rightly say, coming again back to the SIGN sentencing, said justice delayed, justice denied. Where are the other culprits? And I think this sums it up, James. We often say, we've talked about at great length about justice delayed, justice denied in India. India's
right.
rule of law is just a farce.
Absolutely. And it's, it's long overdue, and it's just not going to happen. As you've stated before, so many people have died since that time. The accountability factor is so low. But even more important is that we never, and I don't just mean the Sikh community or ourselves, I think worldwide, we just never forget what happened and what could have happened. So we need to just really make sure that it never repeats itself.
Yeah. And Neeraj Kumar comes in with quite a sinister comment, actually. It's saying that you think Panoon and other Pendus are going to survive for long. Now, I had to look up this word Pendus. I think, if I'm right, it's a Hindi word. I assume it's a slightly derogatory word. It translates as villagers. I assume it's a derogatory term, you little villagers or whatever. But basically, the comment here is saying, do you think Gurbajan Singh Panoon is going to survive the assassination squads, the killing squads from the Indian government? This is a big question. I think Gurbajan Singh Panoon is a very courageous guy. He really has stood above the parapet. He's put his head above the parapet. We do know already they've tried to assassinate him, but the plot got foiled at the last minute, fortunately. But certainly, these hit squads, I guess they are still in existence. Gurbajan Singh Panoon is so high profile now. I suspect if they assassinated him now, I think it really would, I think we'd be into a different game there, because already the one plot has been uncovered with links to the Indian government. I think if they tried it again, wow, is Modi stupid enough to try it again? I don't know, James. Maybe he is.
Well, I don't put anything past Modi and, the raw agency, but I can definitely say that I doubt it'll be as high profile or as clear cut as the Najjar murder. I think that, in fact, if they do, it's going to be mysteriously a car accident or something like that. They will definitely try to blanket it a lot more than they did with the Najjar assassination. And that in itself is scary because of the fact that it's going to give them an out. It's going to give them that autonomy when it comes to that happening. But again, I agree with you as well, Angus, that he is so high profile now. I think that it's going to be hard for them to be able to execute any type of plan because he does have security and such around him. So let's hope that he continues, because let's face it, he is a very powerful presence in the movement, but he's also very entertaining in his process.
Indeed, he is. He is absolutely. He's always great for having a talk about. But actually, on a serious note, talking about car accidents, of course, I think it was a couple of days ago, was the anniversary of the death of Deep Sidhu in a supposed car accident. I didn't have really time to talk about that today. Maybe we'll do it tomorrow, but certainly there'll be a lot of talk this week about the death of Deep Sidhu that was highly suspicious in a supposed car accident. And I think our audience will have thoughts about that. Do let me know your thoughts in the comments about Deep Sidhu. And then our final set of comments, and Deep Singh says, no one is safe from President Trump's tariff sword. Modi's trade will also be executed. Ha ha ha, James.
We'll see how that works. As I say, I personally wouldn't trust Trump as far as I could throw him, and I wouldn't throw him far because I just don't want to touch the orange potato there. But yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Indeed, but certainly Trump's tariff sword is being wielded quite wildly at the moment. I think every country is ducking as best as it can as we speak. But anyway, we'll see. Mankind Success says, no justice for Sikhs in India. You are absolutely right. There will never be justice for Sikhs in India as it stands. There is only one solution, as we often say, James. It has to be Khalistan.
Absolutely. And when Khalistan is formed and recognized, it's going to be so much better for the whole Indo-Pacific. I mean, you know, they're talking about what could make it a more stable region. And I think that is the key right there.
Indeed. And Suff2 Muffins signs us off today with a lovely comment saying, the hope, the voice of justice by our family. James and Angus, all Sikhs are thankful. Well, we are thankful to you guys for your lovely comments. To you and guys, done history already, and you are in our minds and hearts. We tried to spread your voice, so I appeal all brothers to please share as much as you can. That is an absolutely spot-on comment. Please do share. That we exist. Let more people know that we exist. We're trying to spread the word. It is so important that we do mobilise the grassroots in the diaspora and indeed throughout India. We bring the truth. We bring this message to everybody out there in the community, that they hear more about the truth, about what's really going on, that they are not alone in their feelings and their support for Khalistan, that they must realise it is not a peripheral movement, it is mainstream, it is the heart of the Sikh community. There are so many people in the Sikh community who now understand and realise that it is a realistic prospect now, that Khalistan is on the cards. The movement is gaining in momentum, it is gaining in power, it is finding its place amongst the higher echelons of global politics. People are talking about it, whether in the US administration, whether here in the UK, all around the world. It is the topic of conversation with global governments. So even the United Nations are talking about it. So it's important that all of you out there spread the word, get more and more people at grassroots involved in this, get out there and also tell people about Satluj TV, James.
Absolutely. And, you know, speaking of sharing, if anybody is in the Los Angeles area over the next month, we would love to get some pictures and videos of preparations there. And again, we spread the word, but again, we thank everyone for being a part of our show.
Indeed we do, but unfortunately we must wrap it up for another day. But don't forget to keep those comments coming. Thanks so much for all your comments, loads of really interesting comments, but do keep those interesting ones coming. Do let us know any of your thoughts. Likewise, educate us. There's been so many fascinating comments telling us things that we didn't even know about, so we do love comments like that. Likewise, you can message us directly at message@satlodgetv.com if there's anything you'd like to bring to our attention that you don't want to put in the public domain. So thank you for all your emails that we have been receiving. Much appreciated for those. But in the meantime, we must wrap things up for another Perspectives for the day. Thank you so much for watching. It is a goodbye from me, and it is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.